Well, a new report releases new details about the Filip Forsberg contract negotiations. And after hearing it, Ann and I have only one question. How in the ever-loving, flaming diddly poo have the Predators not re-signed Forsberg yet? Big topic we're going to dive in today at the Locked On Predators podcast.
You're Locked On Predators, your daily podcast on the Nashville Predators. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for making Locked On Predators your first listen of the day every single day. We appreciate you tuning in. I'm Nick Morgan. I'm a writer and editor at ontheforecheck.com, and I have a partner in crime.
You do. I am Ann Kimmel. I'm a writer at ontheforecheck.com.
All right. So in case you haven't heard, Filip Forsberg's an unrestricted free agent. I think that tidbit sort of snuck up on everybody, I guess. So, yeah, we've gone back and forth about contract negotiations. We're at the point where anything that comes out from here on out is going to be major news in Nashville just because we're counting down the days till the start of unrestricted free agency. So, Frank Saravalli at the Daily Faceoff got on his podcast. He does the Daily Faceoff. What's it called? The DFO rundown. I don't know. It's from the Daily Faceoff. Tune in. It's a good show. Yes. And him and Jason Gregor were talking about Filip Forsberg. And here's basically what he said. I'm just going to read the quote. It said, Gregor said, I'm not sure what Forsberg is asking for, but if you're the Nashville Predators, I don't see how you wouldn't sign him. He's your best forward. To me, it's not close. He's a $9 million player. And Saravalli jumps in and says, they didn't ask for $9 million. I can tell you that. They were asking for what I'm told is well south of what Roman Josi makes, somewhere in the low eights. How is that even a hesitation on Nashville's part? And as Gregor went on to point it out, if that's what he's signing for, if that's the going rate, you're not going to bring in anybody in a better contract that's going to bring you what Filip Forsberg does. And what do you make of all of this?
What the flagnog is happening in Nashville? What is happening? Because with all, the more time that goes by with Filip Forsberg unsigned, the more ridiculous this situation becomes. And then honestly, when you hear this from a pretty darn credible source, people
for sure.
who
it's Frank Saravalli.
This is right. This is somebody who is not just throwing a number out there willy-nilly. And the number is in the $8 million anywhere range. The idea that Filip Forsberg has not been re-signed is absolutely mind-blowing to me, and not in the good way. Like, I cannot figure out, and we're gonna talk about maybe how this has not happened. I cannot figure out how Filip Forsberg has not been re-signed in Nashville, and this is alarming.
It's mind-boggling. I mean, think about it. Earlier this year, we were talking about when Filip Forsberg started having his career year. We're thinking, there might be a team that overpays and gets like $10 million for him.
Yes.
He's making in the $8 million range. Like, he could be making less than Roman Josi, who's your highest paid person. That was another debate. Remember, it's like, should he be paid higher?
Can't pay him more than Roman.
If he's not, then he's going to go. This is like everything that Preds fans have asked for. Filip Forsberg, if this is true, is willing to take a hometown discount to play for the Predators, and the Predators are making this an absolute train wreck for Filip Forsberg's camp. Like, what is the issue there? He's willing to play for you for a huge discount for something that is not only manageable for your cap, but actually helps your cap long term, because now all of a sudden you have an extra $1.5–2 million to play with to go
Yep.
out and sign other guys. Like, this is, if this is true, that's huge for Forsberg. Now, look, I obviously there's a lot going on behind closed doors. You have to also think this is probably Forsberg's camp that told this to Frank Saravelli. We don't know what else is kind of going on behind the scenes. I get that. But it
Come
seems
on.
to me, Anne, that Filip Forsberg is the one that's giving here. Like, the one that's
Yes.
willing to maybe meet halfway. And
Mhm.
if David Poile butchers this, like,
Oh
he's
gosh.
done in terms of the fans. Like, he's done. Unless the
Yes.
Preds win the Stanley Cup next year, you're going to see a situation that I don't really think Nashville sports has ever experienced. You think about what you've seen in Vancouver with the Jim Benning stuff last year. The people chanting "Fire Poile" at games.
Yes.
That can come to Nashville. I think that does.
Mhm.
If Forsberg leaves and the Predators go into this little ho-hum sort of middle of the ground thing again next year, Poile is done in the fans' eyes. He's done.
Yes. And he's on such a short leash right now as it is when you look back over the season that the Nashville Predators had, because so many things went well except outcomes. So you finally had great production from Matt Duchene, Roman Josi season year. UC Saros stepped into the starters position and was nominated for the Vezina. Filip Forsberg having this incredible year. So many things went well, and the Predators were first round exits. And then you have the NHL awards where you have Roman Josi and Saros nominated for 3 awards. Neither one of them win. Let me tell you something. If you come out of this season with a first round sweep, with no awards for players who were incredible, and I get that that is out of Poile's hands, but for
Right.
the fan base, that's hugely disappointing. And then you end up with no Filip Forsberg. What good came out of this amazing season that the Predators had? It feels like this past season, for all of the gains, for all of the records, was a waste when you're looking at moving closer to a Stanley Cup. A waste of a season.
And that's, I think, what the biggest heartbreak is too, because your fans are going to look at that and say, okay, what was that all for? If Forsberg was really
Yes.
gone, if you didn't want to bring him back, then why didn't you just trade him? Like you said in your post.
Yes.
Again, remember when we've talked about this before, when they didn't do anything at the trade deadline, despite all these players having record year, and you heard Poile say, well, we didn't think we were close enough. If you thought that then, why didn't you trade Filip Forsberg? That's going to be the question that's going to be asked. Again, not saying I would have agreed with it, because I think anybody who has a chance to compete in the playoffs should do whatever they can to be good in the playoffs. That's my personal opinion. But, if that's your opinion at that time, then why even go through this? Why even put your fans through pain down the stretch run? Why even go to the postseason? Like, if you think you're going to lose, if something's telling you you don't have a team to win, then you should be trying to, if you couldn't sign Filip Forsberg, you should trade Filip Forsberg.
Yes.
That's going to be
and I get that. That would not have probably been a popular thing to do at the trade deadline, except now you look back and you think there were 2 good options. You didn't take option A, which was trade him at the deadline. And option B right now is not looking good. And so this could end up for Nashville being a complete lose-lose. And that's terrible when what you're losing is Filip Forsberg or the value of Filip Forsberg. And the Predators may walk away from this season with neither.
Yeah, I kind of want to get into the ins and outs of it and to kind of look at where Poile stands on this, because this is not the first time something like this has happened. And he is displaying some signs of being a bad manager, like textbook signs of being a bad manager. Want to talk first about Bet Online. They're sponsoring today's show. Bet Online is your number one source for all of your betting needs and sports info. You can find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including everything from Major League Baseball, golf, boxing, UFC, MMA, pretty much any sport you can imagine. Plenty of stuff out there for the MLS season as well. They got all kinds of props, odds, and lines, different prop bets, including for soccer, who's going to score the first goal. In baseball, there's stuff like how many hits is Dansby Swanson going to have, like over under 2 today or 1.5. Anything like that, anything that you can think to bet on when it comes to sports, Bet Online has you covered. They also remain the best spot for all of your sports scores, podcasts, and news. So if you need to get caught up on something, they're the place to go. So head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. Bet Online, where the game starts. Here's the other question I have about the Forsberg situation. There's been rumors that, there really hasn't been rumors. David Poile has come out basically and said explicitly he's not signing for anything less than 8 years, making it think like maybe Forsberg wants a few like lesser years on his term, maybe something like a 5-year or 4-year deal. There's also been some speculation, some rumors circulating around that maybe the issue is that Forsberg wants a no movement clause.
Right.
Is that, that's not in my eyes an issue, Anne. Like, that's not in my eyes an issue. Like, if that's what Filip Forsberg wants and that's the salary he's willing to do it for, this is a deal. Like, give Filip Forsberg that.
It's still a steal if you have to, and I know David Poile just does not particularly care for no move clauses, no trade clauses. And I get that.
He's only given out 2 in his history.
Yes. So this is not, a road that he likes to go down. And I understand that from a business perspective. But if you have somebody saying, I'm willing to play here for significantly less, and it is significantly less, in an $8 million range is significantly less than what I think Filip Forsberg is going to get offered in free agency. If he's willing to come here for significantly less money, there is no realm in which it makes sense to me that term or a no move clause is the straw that's going to break the camel's back and not get this done. If Filip Forsberg wants 5 years, and I understand, David Poile in the press conference where they were talking to Bill Haslam, who's going to be eventually the majority owner, he said, kind of his wording was a little, the ball is in Philip's court. We're not going to offer less than 8 years. And this could be Phil's team, and he has to decide if he wants to buy in. If Filip Forsberg,
to begin with,
if Filip Forsberg is willing to sign a contract for less than $9 million, he is 100% bought in. That is buy-in. That is millions of dollars worth of buy-in right there. So the narrative is not matching when you hear this report of what Forsberg's camp has said. It does not match. It doesn't mesh.
Well, it's a buy-in from Filip Forsberg. You know who it's not a buy-in of? David Poile.
Yes.
Because look, here's a guy who's willing to pay for less. If he's willing to buy in, David Poile doesn't sound like he's willing to buy into Forsberg or this Preds. Look, if he wants like a 4-year deal or something short, I get it. You don't want him, or you don't want to come into the same situation 4 years from now. But like but at the same time, it's like a bipolar situation because Poile wants to like have Forsberg commit long term and have this be his team, but he won't offer him a no movement clause. Like he doesn't want to give Forsberg
how does that
for not getting traded? Like, is that the issue here? Could you but that's the thing. It's like Poile, if that's the case, then he wants that flexibility to be able to move Filip Forsberg. Well, then of course Filip Forsberg's not going to commit long term Because what happened?
Right.
What's happened to some of Filip Forsberg's buddies on the team? Yeah, Victor Arvidsson wanted to stay and compete in Nashville. He signed a long-term deal. What happens? David Poile trades him. Ryan Ellis.
Ryan
We have heard
Ellis,
a
yes.
lot come out about this one since the end of the season.
That's a
Ellis
mess.
was more or less heartbroken about being traded.
Mm-hmm.
He signed a long-term deal because he wanted to stay in Nashville. What happens? David Poile trades him. And if you're looking at the Preds,
Right.
if you're the guys that are in the locker room and you keep hearing David Poile go, oh, yeah, I believe in this team, he gets players to come back on a pretty discounted contracts for
Mm-hmm.
long term. And then he puts those players on the block for not even hockey trades, like future assets. Like he traded Arvidsson for 2 draft picks. How is that going to help the team in the locker room? He traded Ryan Ellis
Right.
for, well, one guy who sucks and one guy who's not even, who's 50-50 on making the NHL team next year, even though he's proven to be a pretty decent prospect. Like, how does that help the team right now? And that's the thing. Like Filip Forsberg, if he buys into that and he's like, okay, I like it here. I still think we can win. Let's see what we can do. And you're not getting the kind of commitment you want from your GM. Like, of course you're not going to want to resign because you don't want to buy in when your GM has shown you he's not bought in you, he's not bought into your teammates, and he wants the flexibility to, if things go bad, trade you for probably a prospect at the flip of a hat, if he can.
Yes. And I understand why David Poile made some of those moves that he did, although I think we can all agree that Ryan Ellis, Victor Arvidsson, we did not get Nashville did not get the value for them that they should have gotten based on timing of decisions with David Poile. But when you're making these business decisions and people see how you do that, you cannot be surprised when a player says, I want insurance that that's not going to happen again. You cannot be surprised that Filip Forsberg says, I have seen this happen and I want some insurance, whether that is a no trade clause, no move clause, whether that is, I'm not comfortable with that much term. I want this term. David Poile, you've played your hand enough times that they know what they need to ask for Filip Forsberg to feel comfortable in this situation. And I just can't get my mind around how firm a stance David Poile is taking, whether it's just publicly with the press or whether this is also privately. He's taking a very firm stance on very little wiggle room in this contract negotiation. And it is not a good look. After hearing, what Forsberg's camp is looking for, after hearing, Forsberg himself, they've both parties have said, we want this to work out. But when you look at the information that we have, the party that looks like it's trying to make it work is Filip Forsberg's camp. David Poile, for not having signed him for this price, it does not look like you're really committed to making this work. It just doesn't look like that.
And you and I have both worked in our fair share of toxic workplaces over the years, I'm sure. We've both had some pretty not fun jobs. David Poile, if this is true, if the reports of what Frank Seravalli is saying is true, everything Poile has said in his postseason press conferences, this is akin to a toxic work manager. Like this is akin to a toxic boss. Let's not even get into the fact that the man can't make a decision, can't make a definitive decision. This is very much this is how it's going to be. You're either here or you're not being a team player. You're either all in with this or you're not being a team player.
Right.
And that's the thing. He wants players to buy in. He wants players to invest in the Preds. But, when he trades those same players, and yeah, I get it. Hockey's a business, but you have players. Like if you're signing a big contract, if you're wanting to come back, if you like it in Nashville, if you're taking discounts to come and play for the team, and you do that because their manager wants you to buy in, and then what? The manager can just trade you at the drop of the hat, uproot your life with little to no warning. Like, that's a toxic manager. If you're like, not to pull the curtain back a little bit, but in television news, which is the industry I came from, you sign contracts, and reporters, producers, anchors, whatever, they sign contracts that say we're locked into the station for X years. We also sign non-competes, which is like, hey, no matter how we leave, we can't work for another station in Nashville for a year, like no matter how we leave.
Right.
So there's like all this thing that's like, no, we're locked in, we're committed to this. The TV station can fire you at the drop of the hat for anything. Whether they fire you for cause, whether it's just budget cuts, like they can let go of you for budget cuts. And if you want to work in the business again, you'd have to move somewhere else because you couldn't work in your home for a year. Even if, and that's like the thing. It's like there's all this flexibility for the employer, but there's not any flexibility for the employee. And that's what like this kind of hardline stance for Poile reminds me of. Because it's like you're asking Forsberg, oh, no, he's not signing anything less than 8 years. We need for him to buy in. Like, oh, he's got to buy in. And I know the second. I know what's going to happen because I saw the same thing happen 10 years ago. The minute Filip Forsberg signs with the Los Angeles Kings or New Jersey Devils or Pittsburgh Penguins or Capitals, wherever he goes, we're going to hear David Poile come out and say, we're very disappointed. Filip Forsberg indicated he wanted to come back. What's blah, 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 blah. He told us we were coming back. So, that's, I saw it happen 10 years ago. And I guarantee you, if Forsberg leaves, that's what's going to come out of the narrative mouth, because that is the quintessential line of toxic management. The minute you stand up for yourself, the minute you say no, the minute you're like, you know what, I don't think you're valuing me, you're suddenly a detriment to the team. You're not a team player. You're selfish.
Yes.
That happens in work. That happens in sports. And I think fans, look, I'm just going to come out and say it. I think fans overlooked David Poile's share of the blame for A, Ryan Suter hat contract situation, and B, the entire Shea Weber fiasco. I think a lot of people overlooked or forgave David Poile's sizable share of the blame for that situation, because yes, David Poile did deserve some blame for both of those situations. 10 years later, when you're already not viewed favorably in the eyes of most Predators fans, there is nowhere to hide. If Filip Forsberg winds up signing, there is going to be no goodwill. And, no amount of plan Bs, no amount of trust me, I think I've earned the right to know what I'm doing here. None of that from Poile is going to have the fans forgive him for bringing back Filip Forsberg.
Yes, I 100% agree. I think he is on such a short leash with this fan base right now, and for a lot of reasons. And I agree with you. I think this is going to be a nail in the coffin for David Poile. Now, whether that happens with the leadership team, I don't know. But as far as fans are concerned, if we lose Filip Forsberg, Nashville is really going to be done with Poile. So let's talk for a minute here about what do we think David Poile is doing.
You asked a question, an interesting question before we started filming, and I kind of want to bring that up. Do you think David Poile really wants Filip Forsberg back this much, or is that just an extra piece to have?
I would never have really had that thought, and I have not had that thought through this whole process. I did not have that thought at the trade deadline. I really have felt like David Poile has been all in. We want Forsberg back. This is a top priority. But I will say, last night, after reading this information about what Forsberg's team is allegedly asking for, I came to this horrible thought of, maybe David Poile really isn't super invested in getting Filip Forsberg back. Maybe he's not. Maybe he is going through these motions, and maybe he has another fish on the hook that he thinks he might like better, but he can't just not sign Filip Forsberg at this point because he didn't trade him at the trade deadline. So he can't just be like, yeah, we're going to skip this. And so it feels like there's a part of me that wonders, is he really not that committed anymore to Forsberg because he has something else he likes better? And so he's going to take kind of this hard line stance, and he is going to frame the narrative up like, look at, I'm trying to make it Phil's team, but he's really not. Like, and I will say again, did not have that thought the whole way through, the season to the trade deadline, even in, this postseason. It had never really occurred to me that maybe Poile really isn't that committed to Filip Forsberg. But now you actually have to ask yourself that.
Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting question because, hey, if he's like thinking like, well, maybe it was maybe it's just a one-off season. Maybe we think there's another player that we can get is better than Filip Forsberg. If that's the case, why have this song and dance? Filip Forsberg's willing to come back. And as, Jason Greger said on the podcast that kind of spurred our entire episode today, who else are you going to get that brings you what Filip Forsberg did at this price? Because $8 million, yes, that's probably going to be Nazem Kadri's asking price. And I would argue there's less chance of him repeating his season than Filip Forsberg did repeating his season. Mm-hmm. Johnny Gaudreau's out there, sure, but Johnny Gaudreau is going to make a contract pretty close to what Artemi Panarin makes, which is like 11 and a half, just because he's probably the best free agent that's hit the market. Excuse me, since Panarin and John Tavares a few years ago. So he's going to make significantly more. I'm so mad about this. I'm choking to death.
Don't choke up.
Yeah. And then, there's like the Val Nichushkins and, Andre Burakovskis and some of those players. And, we're going to take a deep dive into how they might fit in the Predators lineup, on a future show. But, do they, are they 80-point scorers, or are they just really good second line players or like first line support players? So like,
and you have
go ahead.
You have to look at too, for, an $8 million, $9 million range. If you keep Filip Forsberg, you really have to look at, you're also, if you keep Filip Forsberg, you are maintaining, that hard to describe intangible team chemistry that I think really affects the performance of players like Matt Duchene. So if you can keep somebody like Filip Forsberg, a known quantity, who has great line chemistry with Matt Duchene, who the two of them play well off of each other. I mean, you have the evidence in front of you. You have statistical evidence that these two play well together. And you can sign him for less than you can sign, Nazem Kadri. How is this a question? Like, because, losing Filip Forsberg is a reset for more players than Filip Forsberg. And when you know that you have chemistry on that top line, why would you even think about jacking with that if it's going to cost you less than $9 million? It makes no sense to me. It makes no sense to me right now.
I don't know. Like, I don't know what is going through David Poile's mind. This is a guy who we have seen swing for the fences a couple times very successfully. A man who is not afraid in the past to go after somebody that he thinks is actively going to make his team better. He's done that multiple times. I don't know why in the past few years he stopped doing that. I don't know if there's something going on behind the scenes. I don't know if there's something from ownership, even though he claims there's not.
And they claim there's not. They
And they
claim
claim
they're
there's
behind
not.
him 100%.
I don't know like why he has suddenly become so passive in his moves. You know, if you have a team, and we've talked about this before, there's a lot of people who think the Preds should go full scale rebuild. You look at the teams who go through full scale rebuild and they're packed with, players past their primes, making all this insane amount of money that they can't move. Those are the teams in need of full rebuilds. Again, that's not the Nashville Predators. 3 of the 4
Right.
highest paid players on the Nashville Predators had career best seasons last year. One of them just had maybe the best scoring season by a defenseman in 30 years. And the other one of the top 4 that didn't have a career best season still had his best season in over 3 years. So that's not a team in need of a rebuild. That's a team in need of help.
Mm-hmm.
And, if you lose Filip Forsberg, you're back at square one. And then you can start talking about maybe a full-scale rebuild. And I don't think Preds fans are going to like, even seeing what the Colorado Avalanche accomplished, I don't think they're going to like what that entails.
That, and I also feel like David Poile, if that is the direction you're going to go, David Poile came out and said, hey, it's not going to be any bigger of a rebuild if we lose Filip Forsberg. And there's such dissonance in that statement when you look at this Nashville Predators team. How are you going to lose Filip Forsberg and go, yeah, it's not going to be that much different? And again, this makes me come back to, does David Poile have a fish on the hook that he thinks will be better than Filip Forsberg? Because that makes no sense. It makes no sense to say if we lose Filip Forsberg, it's not that big of a rebuild. It doesn't really change what we're doing. How in the world does it not change what you're doing? That doesn't make sense. And I understand, I try to have a lot of grace for David Poile because it's not easy to be the guy in the seat. And, he does look at things long term and differently. And his perspective is different from a business sense than from a media sense or a fan sense or even a head coach's perspective. And I understand that. But there comes a point in time where you have to connect the dots a little better with the fans, with the media, than David Poile is doing, because what he has said throughout this whole process with Filip Forsberg, prior to the trade deadline to where we are this morning, it doesn't make sense. And, I am not one to hashtag fire Poile. In my opinion, this is going to be how this plays out is going to be huge. And I'm curious, Nick, if Filip Forsberg is gone and he is asking for less than $9 million and the Predators don't sign him, what does that mean in your eyes for David Poile?
It means that he doesn't have a vision for this team. And if it is, it doesn't line up with the team's vision. It apparently doesn't line up with the ownership vision, and it doesn't, line up with the fans' vision. And when there's that much disarray, when there's that much unrest, something needs to change. And I would like to have faith that, maybe ownership steps in and makes a change at the helm. I know he's got a very good relationship with, I know the owners have a very good relationship with David Poile. I don't know how much say Bill Haslam is going to have if the sale goes through and gets finalized. But the status quo can't remain the same. And if we get into a situation like next year, like let's envision Roman Josi has another big year. UC Saros stands on his head again, making like 40 saves a game, and the Predators still like either get swept in the first round or like miss the playoffs altogether. That's a failure. That is an organizational failure, and I hope that doesn't happen.
Is this fireable?
Yes.
in your eyes?
If the Predators are, if they even have a hint of struggling next year, it's fireable.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's interesting, though, to end on, a lot to chew on. Again, this was all thanks
Mhm.
to a report from the DFO Rundown podcast with Frank Saravelli, a very reliable source. We will, keep an eye on it. July 13th. That's the day Filip Forsberg, if he wants, can sign with another NHL team. We'll have to see if something changes between now and then, because as it stands right now, unless there's something different behind the scenes, it doesn't sound like either side is necessarily happy with the other side right now. So we'll have to see. And where can the people find your work online?
You can find my work at ontheforecheck.com, and you can find me on Twitter at AnnK_Mama on Ice.
You can find me at ontheforecheck.com. Follow me on Twitter at _NSMorgan. And while you're there, be sure to follow the podcast on Twitter at LO_Predators. If you're watching this on YouTube, be sure to like the video, subscribe, and leave a comment. It helps us get this out to Preds fans just like yourself. That's going to do it for today's Locked On Predators podcast. Thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We'll be back tomorrow with more Preds talk. We'll see you then.